I want to talk about ecological dynamics. So it's this concept, it's a understanding of organisms as complex adaptive systems where movement behavior emerges from the performer-environment complex. Okay, so that's probably a bunch of like gibberish right now. A lot of this is very complex, so I'm going to do my best to like explain it. We'll have some questions, and then we'll get into hopefully like a very rich discussion. So we've got 6 key principles of ecological dynamics, and then 4 key principles of its application. My plan is to get through all of those, and then we can start really diving into like, okay, what does this mean for contact? So first key principle is direct perception. So a lot of this, to really understand why it's important, we also have to understand what the traditional approach is. In the traditional approach, when we're coordinating action, we're first sensing information. And so in the traditional approach, this information, that imagine the light that's coming to my eyes, is fundamentally impoverished, right? There's things missing from that light, right? And so in the traditional approach, our brain will then process and fix that information using like inferences, using stored memories, using all sorts of magic that isn't really well defined. But basically we say, the brain fixes the information, and then we come up with a representation of the world. So I imagine there's a representation of this room and Lawton and I in my brain. And then based on that, I would coordinate an action. And I would choose a stored motor program of all sorts of different actions. So for instance, one action might be initiate dance. And there's this sort of motor program that gets recalled, right? And Lawton's brain is doing the same thing, right? And the idea is that our brains are telling our body what to do. So in ecological dynamics, we're saying, actually, like we can skip almost all of that. That we think the information is fundamentally good, right? So that the light, imagine like we call them ambient energy arrays. So imagine like all the light that is coming out from all these different places. It's bouncing around the room. It's bouncing around all of us right now, right? All the sound that's bouncing from everywhere. We imagine the structure of all these ambient energy arrays, right? All these different things. We imagine that the current array is uniquely specified by the environment right now. So that the array of all the light and sound and pressure and all the things bouncing around the room right now can only be created by one exact environment. If anything was changed, it would change the array. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a pretty fair assumption. It makes sense, right? And hence, when we think about it like that, then what we actually need to do is not fix this big, bad sensory information and use these mental representations. It's actually just find what information is good, right? What information is coming to me right now that tells me that I can initiate a dance with Lawton, right? And how I might do that, right? So in ecological dynamics, we call these affordances. These are opportunities for action. They're present in the environment. They're present in our relationship with the environment. And we believe we can directly perceive those in the information coming to us from our relationship with the environment. That's direct perception. Okay? Our next concept is direct learning. You can sit down. Thank you. Thank you so much. Great work. Next concept is direct learning. So that's very simple, very intuitive. We learn directly through our experience. So, can I use you again? I'm so sorry. So imagine we're dancing, right? We're experiencing. So we're perceiving, we're acting, we're cognizing. As we're doing this, we have our attention, what we're paying attention to. We have our intention, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to actualize, right? It may not be an actual goal. Maybe our intention is just to kind of connect and explore, right? Rather than to do a particular thing. But we believe with direct learning that we learn directly through our experience. That our experience of like trying to perceive, for instance, like, can I enter a dance with Lawton? What information is telling me that this is danceable, right? Through experiencing that over and over in all sorts of different ways, we start to really attune to the information that really tells us that at a fundamental level, right? And we directly learn through educating our attention and also educating our intention. What are we trying to do, right? There are certain intentions that are more skillful at actualizing whatever we're trying to do, right? So if Lawton wants to dance with me, but imagine like what's a not so skillful intention here? Might be like, yeah, if we like really like try to slam into each other, and then he's like, oh, I really didn't like that when you slammed into me. Okay, that's a sign. Okay, I can educate my intention now. I didn't want to disconnect in that way, right? And so we're directly learning through our experience. Okay. The next one is where a lot of the magic happens. Thank you again. I'll just like call you back up. The real magic of this approach, in my eyes, is self-organization. So the idea is this is a property of all sorts of systems. They don't have to just be living systems, where complex behavior that can seem or be intelligent emerges from the characteristics and the interactions of the components. So imagine there's all sorts of examples of this. One would be crystal formation. Imagine you have all of these molecules, right? These molecules aren't intelligent. But in certain situations, you have all these molecules and they want to arrange themselves into these patterns. Nothing is telling each molecule where to go or how to form this higher order pattern at the scale that there's millions and billions and trillions of these molecules they're organizing into these patterns. How does that happen? Well, there's properties of each of those molecules and how they interact with the molecules around them and how they interact with the crystal that's already formed. And that can become, in certain conditions, self-organization. So another example that maybe this will start to make sense how we're getting to the human body, imagine a school of fish. So if we have all sorts of fish, each of these fish have inherent characteristics, right? They have just things what makes it a fish, right? And they also have ways that they interact with other fish in the environment around them, in the water, and how they might interact when a predator comes. And so these rules, when you scale them up, they become intelligent behavior of the entire school of fish, right? We believe that's how movement is coordinated, through self-organization. So rather than the brain telling the body what to do, as if it's a puppeteer controlling all the muscles, that actually there's a degree to which the brain sets our attention, what we're looking at, and our intention, what are we trying to actualize. But coordination is, in a way, predominantly a bottoms-up process of how all of these joints and muscles and tendons and bones and ligaments, they all have their intrinsic characteristics. They all have ways in which they interact with each other. And so when I'm trying to do something, there's ways at which all of those things self-organize to actualize my intention. We believe this is the mode for the fundamental way that movement is coordinated. And there's a lot of evidence for that. There's other competing ideas, but it's very clear that at some level, there's a lot of self-organization happening. There's kind of debates right now as far as how much the brain is doing, but it's very clear self-organization is happening in the human body. The next three are pretty simple. So we have symmetry between the performer and the environment. So normally when we think about traditional approaches to understanding movement, we think that the performer is the important part, right? We think the performer is the important part, and what's controlling what's happening in the performer? It's the brain. And so the brain is really the important stuff, versus we think that in any context, the performer-environment complex is the fundamental unit of analysis. We can't understand what you're doing without the context that you're in. So if we're dancing, imagine you were to analyze what my movements are, but without knowing what Lawton's doing, or without knowing where the floor is. It wouldn't make sense. So we feel the performer-environment complex, so in this case, me, Lawton, the floor, everyone around, all of this, we need to understand this to understand what's happening with movement. Yeah? Next we have, thank you. Thank you again. So good. Next we have information-movement coupling. So we just believe that movement isn't so much planned or we're not expecting sensory consequences of what's going to happen when you do a certain thing. That actually it's just continuously organized in relation to the environment, in relation to the environment and the information coming to us from our relationship with the environment. And finally, we have repetition without repetition, so functional variability. That idea is quite counterintuitive for some of us. So there was a famous experiment from a guy named Nikolai Bernstein in the 20s. What he did, he compared novice and expert blacksmiths. And so he looked at them, they're striking nails. And so you would think, so obviously the expert blacksmiths, they're much more accurate with their hammer strikes. And so you would think that the experts are actually just recreating a movement more accurately to recreate this hammer strike more accurately. And what you actually find is there's actually more variability in their individual joint movements in the experts. So the experts are using variability functionally. So all the variability in the different joints work together in a little bit different environment, in a little bit different position every time to still achieve the same outcome, the accurate hammer strike, versus the novices kind of block these degrees of freedom. They freeze all the joints together, and then they try to do everything together. And and then, right, things aren't working so optimally. How's that? Those are the fundamental principles of ecological dynamics, right?
What was the last one?
Functional variability, repetition without repetition. So that was his famous idea that in the repetition of these hammer strikes, there actually isn't repetition. That every time those hammer strikes are a little different. And the experts are using the variability in those joint movements more effectively.
Okay. But the basic idea that this is looking at is that that the brain is not the key.
It's still important.
But we have a tendency to think that everything happens in the brain, and that's reductionistic.
Exactly. How do we actually apply this? So when it comes to like teaching movement, this is very radically different, right? So the big upshot of this is if your brain isn't storing these motor programs and it's not telling all the muscles and joints all what to do, it doesn't make sense to teach movements. And it certainly doesn't make sense to drill them repetitively. So what do we do instead? We want to teach with tasks. So this comes back to Newell's model of constraints back in 1981, if anyone's interested. But so he thought of movement as emerging from the interacting constraints of the performer, the environment, and the task. Makes sense. Yeah? So we use what's called the constraints-led approach. So basically with tasks, we're going to manipulate any of those constraints, and maybe all of them, so that different behavior will emerge. Okay, so we have our 4 key principles of using the constraints-led approach. So our 4 environmental design principles. And these are all a lot easier to digest than the ecological dynamics ones. First, we have session intention. So for any session, we want to have an intention between the coach or the facilitator and the athletes, the dancers. And we want to be on the same page. So again, that could be dynamic, but this is kind of like a starting point that we want to have an intention that's shared. Okay. Next, we have repetition without repetition. Again, functional variability. If we think about movement and learning as exploring a perceptual motor landscape, we don't want to just be exploring this one thing every time, right? Can I use you again, Lawton? So in contact, if we were to like practice a lift, right? So let's say lifts are important, so let's practice a lift. What's the best lift to do? Let's say it's this one. So we're going to do, okay, this wasn't the one I had planned, but you know. Anyways, any sort of lift. And so we say, okay, that's good. Let's do it again. We need to ingrain the pattern.
Same one.
Yeah. Same one. So we do the same thing. I mean, and maybe we even say, Lawton, you didn't do that right because your right leg should have been here when you did this first section. So now, Lawton, why don't you try it again and try to correct your left foot position, And so okay. And now, Lawton, your right hand was in the wrong, So then and this is how we usually teach movement, right? But so when we do that, we're exploring this very small space, right? We're trying to do kind of the same thing. It's like we're exploring this like needle point, rather than if we want to say lifts are interesting, let's explore lifts, right? And now we create a task where we're exploring all sorts of different ways that lifts can happen. Now we're exploring a much wider landscape. Yeah? So that's repetition without repetition. It doesn't make sense.
Repetition without what?
Repetition. It does just like the hammer. Yes, just like the hammer strikes. It doesn't always happen in the same way. And same thing here. Variability is functional. Even if we wanted to learn that one lift, we would actually learn it faster and better by doing different lifts each time. But the reality is we don't want to learn the one lift. We want to learn how do we dance better. And that's much better served by exploring the wider landscape. Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, that's also a different whole thing. Let me get through the two more because they're pretty easy, and then I'll remember that one.
I just had a quick clarifying.
Yeah.
So I think what you're trying to say is that you're repeating it at the level of the intention versus the sequence of actions. So the intention is to like do lifts, and you're not trying to repeat the specifics within that. You're trying to be dynamic in that process.
Yeah, but I mean, even the intention, if we think about the education of intention as being an important axis, if our intention is the same or very similar each time, then we're not exploring how does that get more skillful, right? So even that intention, we want that to be different.
Right.
But we might have a larger intention of the session, of what we're going to try to develop, but we don't want the same sort of like, okay, we're just doing this one thing, okay, we're just doing this one idea.
So you're maintaining an evolving intention going into the activity while doing repeated explorations within it.
Yeah, I might take away the word repeated, but yeah. Great. Great, so we have session intention, we have functional variability. Our last two are the really important ones for this. Constrain to afford. So, Jess, can I use you? Constrain to afford. So we're using tasks, we're using constraints, we're manipulating the constraints. What a lot of people tend to do when they start using this approach is they over-constrain. So we say, okay, we're gonna dance. Let's practice entering the dance. Okay, so we're only practicing entering the dance, and we're only gonna practice from like right here, and let's practice entering like this specific like forearm entry, right? And it doesn't have to look like this bad, but it's like, but it's something, along like this of like, okay, we're only gonna practice like, how do we enter a dance with our forearms? And we're completely like kind of ignoring everything else that could be happening. And hence, if you think about the education of attention and intention, what are we paying attention to? What are we trying to do? That's not really present here, right? Our intention isn't dynamic like you were mentioning. It's just, we're just trying to enter the dance with our... There are a lot of times where this is not an optimal thing, right? This is just not what we should be doing. If I'm out here, it doesn't, right? This is like, again, it comes back to like in contact, right? We don't want to have an idea of what we're trying to do because it limits what we try to do, right? When we're open to all the possibilities that can happen, that's where the really interesting exploration happens, right? So same things when we're designing the task. We want to constrain in ways that allow the whole landscape to happen. And we think of like scaling the task. So think of like the quote, like you're not just a drop of water in the ocean, you're the ocean in a drop. So we want to scale that whole landscape, the whole ocean of like, what is contact? If we just jam the whole time, it's too all over the place, right? We're not exploring really specific things, which is great and it's fun, but if we're thinking of like, how do we develop skill? It's too much complexity. So we want to look at certain areas. But when we look at those areas, we still want the whole dance of what is contact to still be present. So if we think about like, okay, instead of that like hyper-constrained task, maybe we say, okay, like let's work on entering dances. But maybe that's the only constraint. Let's explore entering dances. And notice I'm not saying that we can't do other things. It's just an intention to explore a certain area. And I think just watching, you can see that was much more interesting. Like both in terms of like what actually happened, but you could also think if we'd run that for, 20 minutes versus the first one, we're going to learn so much more like this, right? Thank you, Jeff.
Ben, I moved this when I saw it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I saw that. That's fine. And then the last one, and then we'll just get to like questions and discussion. The last one is representative design. So which again is quite similar to what I was just talking about. We want what we're doing in practice to look like our performance environment. So if our performance environment for contact is a jam, maybe I don't want to just like practice with like the fireplace over here. And like partnering is fundamental to contact, right? So it's not to say that we always have to partner with someone else or we always have to practice with partners. But you could imagine dancing without a partner is less representative of dancing with a partner and a jam. So if you were to always practice dance without a partner and then you throw yourself into a jam, that's not a representative practice. That's not going to transfer all that well, right? So with representative design, we want our training to look like our performance environment, but we can move along that spectrum, right? Depending on what tasks we want to look at, what areas we want to develop. It's just when we want to be very conscious that like when we go to that side of less representative practice, we know it's not, we better have a good reason. The deeper we go to that side, the more we should have a really strong reason why this is going to be helpful. Yeah? Those are all our 10 principles. So where should we go from here?
I see a lot of obvious applications in a classroom.
Yeah.
So specifically, this is to help facilitate teachers to teach better and
Yeah.
learners to learn better.
Yeah.
So those are all very helpful contexts. Where else would they be applied? Where else is the work intended for?
I mean, that's a big application for sure, teaching and learning. There's other things we can think about as far as like design. Like for something, when we start redefining something as fundamental as perception, everything should shift, right? So I'll give you an example. So if you look at, this is something that's already been done at a government level. If you have, for instance, street signs, right? Like speeding. So it has a speed limit, right? So it says, okay, here comes a turn and it says speed limit 20, right? So they want you to slow down before the turn because it's dangerous to go too fast. Well, that's kind of working on the assumption that you're going to see the sign, cognize about it, think, I should be going 20, what speed am I going? Make a decision, slow down. There's another entirely different approach where instead of doing that, you just put a bunch of lines on the road. And so if we're working with this like constantly perceiving information and optical flow, we increase the speed of that optical flow by putting these lines on the ground. So it works at the level of perception where you feel like you're going faster just because we put the lines there. And so you don't have, and it's been shown to be quite effective. So it really can be at any level, which is part of the reason I'm so excited to share it, because it's like, wherever you want to take it, I feel like it can go there. If I can keep going more into contact with how I like conceptualize this in contact, if people are interested. So this part is a bit less developed and much more of a skeleton that's very open to like discussion. So for contact, right now we're reconceptualizing things where we're not thinking about the actual movements people are doing. We're thinking about what are the functions that those movements are serving, right? Why are we moving the way we move when we dance? So for me with contact, I was thinking about it And I think we can distill it to 5 kind of key pillars, we could call them. So the first 2, which to me are the most fundamental and large, all-encompassing, are connection and exploration. I think everything in contact we can boil down to like we're working with some level of connection and we're exploring. And then I think there's 3 kind of like subsets or pillars that support that, which are safety, physical safety, psychological safety, social safety. You can't explore if you don't feel safe, right? Attunement, so like what is happening right now, right? Like I can't connect if I'm not attuned to what's happening. And then finally, capacity. So just simply like what are you capable of doing, right? So at some level, we may want to develop that. Yeah. Where does that take us? Where are we at? Yeah.
I was, I don't know if this is on topic or not, but when you were describing how, like, the brain is not in charge of the movement, but there's this self-organizing happening going on, and I was thinking about emergent strategy, and murmurations of birds, and like schools of fish, and how you think that they know what they're doing, but they're really just paying attention to like 6 other birds around them, and then it ends up being like this coordinated movement.
I heard it was magnetism in the cells.
No,
It's just it's the birds right around the bird that, so if one bird turns and like 3 or 4 or some
So
6.
you're paying
it's like-
attention to.
They have a threshold and it's not very high.
It's
about
like 6.
Yeah.
I mean that's what was in.
That's the most recent word for murmurations.
Yeah. That it, so it's and that fish do this. So I was just thinking like in terms of that question about intelligence, that if the molecules and the muscles and all of the things in our body are acting as if it's an emergent strategy, and that it's a type of murmuration that our body is doing, and then we're all murmurating like within contact with each other. And like I do a practice called authentic movement, and a lot of times with your eyes closed, the people, like as a witness of the people on the floor, the movements start to murmurate. And so I was just really struck by that description, and how like there's so much that we don't know about the intelligence of the body, and this ongoing emergence of our unfoldment that interacts. And anyway, so I'm going on and on, but and it's also like about like in our scientific method, you separate yourself from the thing that you're observing, but really you're impacting what it is that you're observing. So I felt like this is part of that also, that you can't just like have 2 people moving together. It's also the container in which we're being held that is all impacting, and so it has that sense of feeling of that murmuration again. So anyway, that's what I understood. I didn't understand all the intellectual piece, but that.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. That feels like the traditional approach is one of the things that to me makes this so clearly like a better paradigm is like nonlinearity. Like traditional approaches are kind of like couched in linearity, like A plus B equals C. You double A and you get double C, right? You have a proportional change in outputs for a change of inputs. And in nonlinear systems, a small change in inputs leads to sometimes a huge change in the output, and vice versa. They're not linearly related. It's a complex system. And life is like really nonlinear. There was a scientist that he called it like talking about nonlinear dynamics or nonlinear equations is like going to the zoo and saying non-elephant animals. Like most things are not linear. Like they're almost all nonlinear, Yeah. And so much, like you said, so much of the intelligence is stored in the body. It's easier to like kind of just okay, let's just think about the brain, right? Let's forget about that. But yeah, in reality, there is a lot stored here. You know, there's a lot stored in like just the characteristics of each muscle fiber, right? That those change, those adapt. They're all different. You know, there's different pronation angles, different muscle insertions, right? Like at different places, and different fatigue resistance, fiber types. Like all of these things are different. All of these things are dynamic, you know? And to ignore all of that is just cutting out a huge chunk of reality.